Motch says, honey, you have a bit of a tendency to be behind the bell curve sometimes. You would, I think you just mean behind the curve. You were defending the Tories and Boris longer than everyone else. No, I didn't mean it that way. She just used the term. And yes, but not longer than everyone else, just longer than pessimists, who unfortunately makes up quite a lot of this side. Pessimists, however, are slower to see a good opportunity than an optimist. They're slower to pick up on a good thing. And
is it pessimism or caution?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, because it can be both.
The optimism lasting longer is the kind of thing that doesn't pay off very often, but it certainly can. And I feel like I have an extra obligation as the person that runs this community to not make people so depressed they kill themselves. And I'll tell the truth,
yeah,
but there are ways to present it which make our side more positive, which make us more able to act, rather than encouraging us to wallow in self-pity. I would like to encourage us to take anything that could be an opportunity and push for it, as much as we here have the power to do. So, with Boris, I was optimistic for longer than some. And optimistic initially more than others, more than some. But if that had worked out, then I would have been redeemed.
That was never going to work out with Bojo, man.
Again, most of the reason people, like, before he even got into office, there wasn't a way to know for sure. There were some indications he was a conservative, and we know better now that it seems to be not the leader of the Conservatives, but more its structure and some other elements just make it untenable. So yeah, the whole party. But it's not folly to remain optimistic about an idea that could still work out. Particularly because, I mean, I'm probably on the...
At some point you do reach the definition of insanity.
What practice reaches the definition of insanity, Aidan? That doesn't mean that doesn't make it wrong. The definition of insanity is dumb because it literally matches practice.
Well, it's a misnomer too. It's an idiom more than it is reality, you know, yes. Obviously. But
every time we push forward, we are making some progress. We are organizing. That's what's changed in the last 10 years. I find it completely baffling that anyone can act as if the people rejecting evil doesn't work. The last 10 years have shown a significant shift in the direction of rejecting a specific evil, the evil we oppose. 10 years ago, voices like ours were tiny and barely ever heard. Now, it's roughly half the intellectual market. And it's in the White House to a large extent. Trump would agree with most of what we would say here on the main issues.
Well, what's changed? I mean, actually, not in terms of the temperature. The political temperature changes all the time. But what are we've had 4 years of Trump, 4 years of Biden. Trump is back now. What measurably has changed?
Quite a lot of, especially little things. But the reason it's not obvious to see any big changes is because our enemy still has a lot of power and they have been intensifying. What's like, Aidan, that's kind of like saying we've been at this war for years. We haven't won. Is it even worth fighting? Yeah, because if you don't fight, you just lose. Well, you could think that. You could think that we're being misdirected by our opponents.
Absolutely.
But I disagree that it's completely that. I think the war needs to be fought. Maybe we can do it more intelligently, but the war needs to be fought. We can't just not fight it because then we'll lose. If you're fighting in a conflict and you haven't... No, I know. But by saying what has changed, you're essentially saying... Like, it's like World War I. Like, the strategies used were dumb. And maybe that's what maybe you're right. The strategies need to be more intelligent. But still, the two armies clashed against each other on the fields of battle and didn't move barely at all for years. But they had to stay there fighting each other because if they didn't, the other one would just overrun them. So just because the center of the conflict has not moved doesn't mean the pressure we're putting on isn't effective. As we've been putting on more pressure, so has the enemy. because they're able to, well, they're forced to intensify more because they're in a corner more and more. We started in the corner. We've pushed them back into a corner, at least somewhat. Just because the line of current policy hasn't moved much, it has moved, but not much, doesn't mean our pressure isn't working. And this is the idea of the critical mass. It doesn't have to be a gradual slide into a new era. It can happen relatively quickly. It'll still be a gradation, but it doesn't have to start at the beginning of the culture war and have a smooth transition to the end. It can happen in spurts, sometimes all at once.
The heights of the culture war stuff,
a lot of policy improvements have happened since Trump got in, and that is arguably that big spurt, maybe the biggest one.
The height of the popularity of the culture war stuff, yes, it has maintained. I mean, obviously, tons of people have careers on YouTube from doing culture war stuff, but the real fever pitch of it was years ago, not so much recently. And this change is only happening now. And I'll use another phrase that I think you won't like because it indicates some sort of unseen hand, but it's the releasing of the political pressure valve is what's happening. People were so worked up about this woke stuff. It wasn't popular. It never was popular from the beginning. There was never a time in which Tumblr politics actually had any mainstream popularity. It was absolutely pushed and forced.
Yes.
So in the same way that you do recognize it was pushed and forced, in the same way then, the powers that be, whatever you deign them to be, Harry Thunder, Cosmic Muffin, I don't know, are they not capable of also releasing that pressure valve when something becomes too unpopular?
Yes, but
it's never been popular and it's no longer useful. Let's put it that way.
It would only be advantageous to them to do it if they had not become dependent on it. It's the way you're thinking of it is like, well, we're pretty chill here in power. Let's just turn this for fun with people, and then we'll just turn it off later. We'll take advantage of it.
It's not that coordinated.
Well, that's how it sounds. But it's more than that. It's the deification, as if they just have the leisure to do this. It's more complicated than that. It was seized upon. Like almost everything the powerful people will do is ultimately a desperation move. It's ultimately a necessary, we'll eke out a tiny bit of an advantage from doing this. We'll just see if we can make this work. And half of what they do probably fails. But it wasn't something that they could just casually and effortlessly do to fuck with the public. It cost huge amounts of money. It cost huge amounts of time and effort to get. It's not limitless. Huge amounts of time and effort to get into those positions. And they can only support it for a limited amount of time because the money to do it is limited. And eventually someone says, I don't want to keep losing money. And that flows throughout the entire system. I think that's been happening for at least a couple of years now. It's just gradually hitting all the important points. Viewing woke as just a casual weapon our opponent can dangle in front of us, and it's a completely villain cheerleading perspective that's unnecessary. It is something that they are using because they discovered, holy shit, we can actually do shit with this. Let's prop it up, because it all happened gradually. They discovered ways of using it. Even if they had pre-planned some of it, some of those ideas would have failed. They're not smart enough to be that prescient. The ideas that worked, they stuck with, just like what we do. We're organizing against them. They're organizing against us in a way. They're not as omniscient or omnipotent as the way some people talk about them makes it sound. They're discovering this stuff and using it under desperation. And if they turn it off, it's not a matter of, we're done playing with this now. It's a matter of, we don't want to be shot to some extent.
But maybe it's a communication issue, and I'm certainly not helping with that.
It's by no means just
degrees in communication.
I think to a large extent you're communicating with the audience in the way the audience is communicating already, which is fine and normal.
Oh no, it's not it's not popular.
I am realizing which is good. Just how far in chat I am now behind. I'm reading half an hour behind where we currently are in real time. And I'm trying to understand what Motch means about my framework not having changed since 2018. The parts of it that are the same are the parts that don't need to have changed because they're still correct. I hope that you can be more specific. In the last few years, a lot of the changes I've seen in the audience, I think, are just wrong. I disagree with them. Sargon becoming less of a classical liberal, I think that's just wrong. I don't see the reasons for doing so. the general
James Lindsay too.
Oh, well, I don't know the details, but the general tendency towards this negative view of politics, or this mastermind view of politics, I view as just aberrant. It's just an incorrect view that isn't helping. The only way it could help is to make us aware of potential problems later, and that's something I think a small portion of the political movement should do, is to be pessimistic, to focus on what problems could come up, but not as much as is focused on it. The only change that may be required is that now that Trump is in office and our side is in less of a supplicant position in politics, we've got somewhat more dominance in politics, at least in US policy, that might involve change, that we can't argue from an underdog position so much anymore. There has to be some degree of not just, well, I mean, almost the opposite, not just complaining about what our enemy is doing, but building. I mean, that's always something that Sargon said, and perhaps that's what I'm identifying as well. It's that I am still advocating for the ideology that will build the next civilization, whereas the entire movement, or a large part of it, seems to be focused on still complaining about our opponents rather than what they're building. I mean, half the people, I think, who have this sort of black-pilled view, I don't know if they actually have a suggestion for what to do instead. They just have enemies that they, unfortunately, by describing them so powerfully, deify.
I think that's very untrue if we're still talking about AA and Scrum.
No, they would be a bit different. Although I don't know what Scrump's proposed worldview is. I think I have asked him before and he hasn't had an answer.
Yeah, I don't know if it's something that could... Look, you'd have to read his book. You're going to get escape from being told to read books. But no, I think that they in particular are looking for solutions. I think many people are. It's not the people who are just the doom contrarians. That is the people I think who are just like the anti-SJW kinds, who are just the people who railed against Hollywood or had a pet issue like transgender issues or whatever it is, where it is just focusing on the negative. Sure, because it sells. And people are drawn towards the negatives. Human psychology, just basic Evo psych. You want to know possible dangers, more so than nice things about someone who saved a box of kittens.
I think that's probably nice, why it's easier to land in the camp of just almost dependence on your enemies being so powerful, rather than what I think is the more difficult job of continuing to advocate positively for something, even recognizing how bad things are.
Well, I think it's not so much disadvocating for positivity. It's more just, girding yourself. Hope for the best, plan for the worst.
I don't even see the hope for the best. That's the thing. If I was seeing that, then I would have less to say, less to criticize. But I don't think that. I think they've forgotten how to hope for the best. Motch, I recognize that it wouldn't be invalid to have an impression of it, but I'm not completely against tribalism. It's ideal not to be tribalistic. It's ideal to operate by principles, but we are not in an ideal situation, even if we were in an ideal world. Though this is probably more of a recent development, maybe in the last sort of 5 years, I am well willing and do often advocate for essentially tribal ends. Just not those that violate the principles of a civilized society. And even then, if it comes down to the necessity of survival for a society, then yes, violate those principles. That ultimately comes first. Survival ultimately comes first. But I don't think we're at the point in most countries, it varies country by country, I don't think we're at the point yet where we need to throw away the rule of law in order to destroy what we perceive as our enemy. I think that would be more dangerous than finding the hybrid between tribalistic actions but maintaining principles regardless. There may come a time, and Canada is close to the point where, the so-called principles of their society, which have maintained it under peacetime, are no longer applicable because they're not at peacetime. The civilization has destabilized too much. Survival is now the top priority, and they need to take action rather than just maintain it.
And yet, when you
And
look
that
at
time may
the
come
polling
in other countries too.
when you look at the polling from Canada, what was the number one issue? The reason they voted for Carney, the number one issue,
the perceived defense from Trump.
Yes. What was the least important issue to that same group that was Canadians over 65?
I don't remember seeing the least. What was the least?
Well, it was making Canada better.
I think that was low for a certain age group, as you said, for over 65s, but it was higher for others.
Yes.
Yeah. It was much higher for younger
65
people.
plus, in which both were the case. Yes.
Yeah. That I put down to it being a new narrative and the media having a lot of power. People get inoculated to narratives they hear a lot, but when it's new like that and they don't know what to think, unfortunately, same here in Europe as in Canada, almost everything we hear about Trump is from international press, which is all global homo. There's not even any motivation for anyone here to say anything good about them. Whereas in the US, there are other ways of getting it because it's so relevant that you can hear some good things about Trump. And Americans, because it's more relevant, they're more likely to look into it. So that's it. The power of propaganda is never something I've doubted. It's just more effective against Trump specifically in Canada and Europe. And so unfortunately, that's what it did. But again, it didn't work as well on the young, which is interesting.
Speaking of the young, and this goes back to something you also said about tribalism, did you happen to watch the Piers Morgan panel on the Shiloh Hendricks, the N-word woman?
I'm aware of it vaguely. I'm still half an hour behind
the
chat here. I'm gradually catching up.
Yeah, go ahead.
Trig says his political views have remained the same for 25 years, but have become far more of a revolutionary during that time and have now all but no faith in the ability for the system to change itself. To change, it must break or be broken first. But how hard must it break? Because the break in a cultural paradigm is enough of a break, potentially, that the system can change. Now, we're at the end of a long, extended cycle of stability, and stability in only the technical sense, not useful stability, just technically stability, where the regime, as it were, hasn't really changed. It's sort of changed hands a few times, but it hasn't really changed. We're nearing what I think is the end of that cycle, because these natural human eras come in cycles. We are either seeing the beginning of a new one now, or we will see it very soon. So it's very normal for people to think that it can't happen because it hasn't for so long. But I think it probably can. Now, the only reason it couldn't is if we have advanced so much and technology has changed so much that what it means to be human has changed so much that none of those old rules apply anymore. And that might be the case.
Well, how long do you think this period of stability has been the case? I am curious. How long do you think that this period of stability has been so? Well,
in terms of broad eras, usually it's marked by roughly the war or roughly 1930 with the Great Depression, that being the last sort of great break of civilization. Since then, I'm not saying, whatever definition of stability you may have in mind, I'm not necessarily saying that. But since that time, the Western world has been stable in a sense. Not always in a good way, but even now with the now it's destabilizing, but the regime we've had for the past 30 odd years, the approach in the regime, the soft power government extraction of citizen wealth to pass to foreign countries, global homo, all this stuff, that regime is a form of stability. It's what was needed, or what became normal to keep our societies afloat. And even though a lot of what the establishment have been doing has been purely for their own self-benefit, exchanging our long-term interests for their short-term interests, some of it was also, all of it, in fact, is the web that is currently the stability of the world. Now, it's right to change that, but it is still stability. Our societies have not actually collapsed. They are still going. It's just that it's not an efficient model anymore. We need to change it to a different model, a new stability. That's what I mean. The radical simplification that Trump represents.
Yeah, I'm not sure what that would look like. By the way, I think it goes back a little bit before World War I, but in terms of the current era, sure.
Yeah, Cybersmith, I think you're not qualified for this discussion. Cybersmith is arguing that I should use fictitious sources as if they're real, which he's been arguing for a while.
What fictitious source?
He believes that Indiana Jones is an authoritative source on archaeology.
Oh, okay.
Sure? Whatever.
Is that really the argument?
Yes. However much you think I'm exaggerating that, I'm not at all. It's literally. literally
you told me about this.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Oh, hell yeah.
Eric and Aiden and everyone else, there probably, I'll say this now, there probably is some benefit to me in reading more political philosophy books. Yes. However, the wheat to chaff ratio is too low, and I don't find it interesting enough. Maybe there's a way that I can make it more interesting to myself, but I so rarely encounter examples in reality that show that I need to radically change my belief structure. The existence of a lot of other people that disagree with me, that have a different perspective, and who say that my beliefs haven't changed does not imply that they are correct or that my beliefs need to adjust to be more like theirs.
You shouldn't change your beliefs based on peer pressure, obviously, but or for anyone but yourself.
Optimism, hope can become a crutch. Hope, being able to operate without it, say a sense of duty instead, can be far more resilient. Sure, yeah, that's true. Duty is hard to have without hope when your country sucks. I think when your country sucks, you need to have both at the same time. You can't really have duty without hope if your country sucks. Motch says 80% of the UK wants the immigrants fired off the cliffs of Dover into the Channel. We wanted this for decades. The population wanting something has not made a blind bit of difference my entire lifetime. I didn't say it would. The direction of pressure is in that direction. It's building in that direction. That doesn't mean it's happening, but it means our opponent has to push harder against it. And it's a game of not quite chicken, but it's just a contest to see who breaks first. Either the people or an arbitrary regime we call Globo Homo. It's going to be the Globo Homo regime that breaks first because it's more expensive. What we're doing is the natural result of human impulse. What they're doing is expensive and arbitrary. It will break first. The pattern of historical political change indicates that's how it'll go. It's just going to take time. So people wanting something enough does not make it happen gradually, but it pressures the system towards allowing it to happen eventually, even if that happens all at once, even if that change is sudden. And with Boris, for example, I assumed that was that moment of change. It wasn't, but someday it will happen. And maybe very soon. Maybe not with Farage, but maybe. We're not replicating the normies. We're not shifting the Overton window. We're still just voting for what we want and not getting it. A lot of that has been political maneuvering from our opponent. Again, we were voting for Conservatives for years because they were presenting the most viable option, so we voted for that. And it turns out we couldn't trust them. But how are we going to discover that without going through it? That is progress. It's like wanting to take the prize at the end of the race without running it. You have to know how to win in order to win. We had to clear out there's steps to take before just arbitrarily getting your way. And part of those steps is understanding who you can trust, rebuilding trust networks, which is what Cabal is partly doing. If the Conservatives weren't apt, then we can't expect the public to just know that. Even if we recognize it intellectually, it has to be tested. And if it's not tested, then how can we expect someone else to compete on the basis that they can't do the job? I can. Okay, well, we tried the first group. They couldn't do the job. Now someone else is an option. Maybe they can't do it either, but I say they're a better option. We have to go through to find out. But in all of this, we are putting pressure on the system to move in the direction we want it to. And it is. Just not fast enough. Because our opponent is acting as well. They're doing things as well. They're moving pieces on the board as well. A game of chess doesn't end gradually. Sometimes you can see the writing on the wall, which frankly I can. But it ends all at once with a checkmate. That's what we're probably going to see here. Both sides are moving pieces, and we're gradually moving towards a conclusion, and the conclusion is likely to happen very suddenly. On the large time scale.
You take umbrage with. I'm not attacking you. I'm just curious. You said part of your issue with the way that people like AA describe things is that it includes this sort of what you perceive as an idea of this invisible enemy that has this great power. But then you're also describing our opponents. So who are our opponents?
What I'm saying is nuanced. I'm not saying you can't describe an opponent, but I'm not trying to glorify them. I'm trying to deify their power or to imply, which is what the inference I take from the way it's worded, that they are always ahead of us. And that they just don't even notice that they're just able to play with us with no consequences, which is too far. Sometimes that happens, but
I do not
it's
think that
not by all means all the time.
I can see why that is the vibe, right? Or that's the impression that you get, but I don't think that's accurate. I think part of that is it's just how language works. You're going to have to describe things in this sort of nondescript way to anthropomorphize groups of people as a they.
Every time there's a choice between wording it in a way that will encourage our side or wording it in a way that will discourage our side and makes the enemy look immortal, they choose the latter. Putting the woke away, for example. Why not just say woke is being defeated, woke is being chased away? It means the same thing, apparently, as what they seem to believe, unless they think it's a deliberate scheme which is completely optional for our opponent, and maybe they always wanted to do this. Which there's some limited part of that is true, but nowhere near to the extent they seem to think. Yeah, the lockdown thing, again, people aren't inoculated to things they haven't experienced. Now that they've experienced it, they are, I think, a bit more inoculated. There's a lot of people that aren't. Of course, Motch, you and I both know people in real life who learned nothing from the lockdowns, but a lot of people did. It would not be as successful again.
I'm not so sure. I mean, I always bring this up because I thought it was just so flagrant, but it's the case in so many things. There was an article, I think it was, I want to say New York Times, Washington Post, a major publication, maybe it was the Atlantic, I think, actually. The title of it was, "We Will Forget Much of the Pandemic, and That's a Good Thing." They did the meme on accident, but they were being very serious about it, and they were citing neuropsych research that showed that, and they weren't the first ones to discover this, of course, which is that people really have already forgotten about it. The memory, the cultural, societal level memory for this stuff is so incredibly short that COVID, horrible things were done in the name of public safety under COVID. And yet families fell apart, friend groups and stuff disappeared, or over, elections, but particularly over COVID. Now all that's forgotten. People who were locked up in camps in Australia, it's forgotten about. We've moved on to the next thing. And that's that idea of it being cyclical, because people just forget.
To some extent, but they also get inoculated the more something happens. This is just evolutionary norms. I'm not trying to defend normies as eternally wise, but I'm not trying to denigrate them as eternally stupid either. And I think somewhere in the middle is in fact the truth, not because it's in the middle, but because it's the truth. Again, yeah, I'm not. So may have jumped at that, but no. It takes time, and it would take maybe if the whole COVID thing happened again. That level of inoculation, I think at least like 66% of the public would not accept it happening a third time, or it would be significantly less a third time. But as it is now, it's probably 30-40% wouldn't accept it. And I think that's just too much of a margin of error for the establishment, who I think work on pretty thin margins as it is in terms of power. Motch says, Scrum has to talk constantly about this shit. He always gets accused of having no solutions. I haven't heard any from him. I haven't heard any. I can't tell if you're saying he does, but he's accused of it, or he actually doesn't. You're right. Again, I haven't heard him saying it. I've only heard negatives. And I've only some of his solutions. To be fair, he has some solutions, but they're only small scale. Like he has like balmy solutions, like we have to have a parallel economy. That's a small scale solution. What are you moving towards?
But that's what he can do.
Nothing.
But
I'm not just asking what he can do. I'm asking what kind of society he wants to see. He doesn't seem to have an answer.
Well, if you don't have any power, it's pointless to just sit around and hypothesize.
That's just wrong. That's just incorrect, Aiden. You can still push towards an ideal. If it's navel gazing, then so is reading political philosophy. Ours is not to wonder why. Ours is just to listen and obey, listen and believe.
No, I'd agree with you on that. That reading that stuff is absolutely navel gazing. Sorry.
We're not just capable of small scale change. We need to be moving towards something. What are Scrump's ideals? What are his principles? What does he actually care about or want? I mean, it seems like I don't want to accuse him of this, but others, I think, just feed off of the tyranny and rely on it for sustenance. They don't actually want it to change, but they use it for their position in life and for their own emotional state as well. I don't know if that's what Scrump is like.
I don't think that's accurate, but I don't want to make I don't want to argue for him. So. But that is someone you could ask. I mean, you could also ask AA. I don't know if he would respond, but you could certainly ask Scrump about it. If it's that particular, if you think he's contributing to this negativity spiral.